The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Hi, I'm Leon Charney, and this is the Leon Charney Report, and we promised you a series on the secret war against the Jews by John Loftus. He didn't create the secret war against the Jews. He's an author who spent 12 years of his life trying to discern what happened historically from the time of Saudi Arabia, which was Jack Philby, the father of Kim Philby, to the present time. And we're going to spend about 2.5 hours speaking with this man. We've never done so much time with an author or an individual. And we think it's vitally important for everybody in the world to see, and therefore we dedicate this time to him. So we're going to ask him about personalities that you would not believe were involved in something sort of a conspiracy. Basically, it comes down to two things: greed and oil. Now, John's book is broken up into three parts: the age of bigotry, the age of stupidity, and the age of greed. Am I correct, John?
Yep.
Welcome. First of all, why does an Irish Catholic from Boston get involved with such a problem?
I got in it by accident. I was a Nazi war crimes prosecutor for the Attorney General of the United States. And because I had some intelligence training when I was in the Army, I did the intelligence liaison work for the Justice Department. When I was going through all these underground classified files, I discovered that many of the Nazis we were supposed to prosecute were already on the government payroll. I had discovered the tip of a very large covert operation.
Were you shocked?
I was stunned. I always had an Eagle Scout's view of America. What I was learning very quickly, I spent 2 years in the classified vaults. My security clearances were several levels above top secret. And I learned that one-third
How can you be above top secret?
They have what they call security compartmentalized intelligence. You need a Q clearance to get into the top secret material for nuclear documents, a cosmic clearance to get into the top secret material for NATO. You need a special intelligence clearance to get into wiretaps.
How many people have super top clearance?
Not many.
Does the CIA director have it?
Oh, yeah.
Does the President of the United States have it?
Yeah.
Does he ever go?
I think I'm probably the first person in 50 years to go through each of the vaults of all of the U.S. intelligence services.
The first person?
Yeah. And I was making sort of a consumer shopping comparison. And I started with the Nazis because that was my assignment from the Attorney General. But it soon became quite clear to me there was a lot more than just putting Nazis on the U.S. payroll. We had a number of covert operations going that were so pro-Arab, it's fair to say that they were fundamentally anti-Israel.
Were you born before the Second World War, during the Second World War?
Born in 1950. None of my family died in the Holocaust. Everyone in my family is Irish for 2,000 years. We have no connection with the Jews at all. What this is...
You go to pubs at night like all the Irish people? have a slug here?
You know, that God gave the Irish whiskey so he wouldn't conquer the world too soon.
He accomplished that very well.
Well, it's a health reason. You can't have too much blood on your alcohol system.
Ireland is not exactly a force of arms, right?
Well, the Irish have a unique view of history. I think in many ways we have some things in common with the Jews. There's been a history of oppression. There were 8 million Jews in Ireland a century ago. There are 5 million there now.
In Ireland?
Yeah.
There are 5 million Jews?
No, 5 million Irish left.
Oh.
Our population declined 3 million. Famine, starvation. Genocide isn't unique to the Jews. The Holocaust is the most unique form of genocide that ever existed. Because for the first time in the human race, the idea was to exterminate an entire gene pool. You know, rub out the seed, man, woman, child, and infant. All of our races have had genocide in the past. Nobody ever had the kind of crime perpetrated than the Jews did.
I checked with a few people before we brought you on. I checked with your publishers, and I checked with some other people in Washington. I checked with a lot of people, and they tell me that you're a very credible man, that you're not suffering from any phobias or any kind of persecution complex, that everything is sane within your mental constraints or my mental constraints. But maybe 90% of the book is true, maybe 95, maybe 85. No one said it was 100% true. How do you feel about that?
Nor do I. At the very front of the book we say, in this book we're doing interviews with people who are retired from the intelligence agencies. And we can only corroborate 80% of what they're saying, for sure. My feeling is it's higher. It's probably 90% throughout the book, and probably close to 100% in the more modern sections. But you have to understand that everything that's in this book is in the 1/3 of modern history that's been classified. This is all new material. No one has ever broken this kind of ground before. No one was ever able to sit down with hundreds of former intelligence officers and get them to talk about their past.
Were you reviewed in the New York Times?
No.
Why not? They reviewed Howard Stern, someone told me the other day, and tales of sex and lies and videotapes. I don't know what he does.
In the last decade, there's been a good half dozen books that have been critical of the ties between American corporations and the intelligence community. Not one has been reviewed. They walk away from it.
Why?
I don't know the answer to that. But it's not just me. There was Chris Simpson, who wrote a wonderful book where he documented from the State Department files how American businessmen invested in Nazi Germany.
Right.
His book was never reviewed in the New York Times.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You think Punch Sulzberger was a Zionist?
No. Matter of fact, he said once that if Israel ever becomes a nation, he'd resign from the Jewish race. The New York Times back in those days was not well known for...
They took his resignation, by the way. No one cares.
Well, I think there have always been people who have been anti-Zionist. There was a joke about Henry Kissinger, one of the old spies, said that he should be forced to change his religious affiliation from Jewish to self-promotion. I thought it was such a funny line.
But he did it. It's very successful. He goes to church every day. He prays for the self-promotion. We don't want to jump around too much, but I don't get the feeling that you like Kissinger too much. A lot of people in the United States feel that Kissinger is, and I believe he's a highly intellectual person. I think he's been very involved now and lately in the Jewish community since he stopped being the Secretary of State and stopped being, let's say, a public servant. But during the Yom Kippur War, and we spoke about it the last time, there was a lot to be desired. But you were very tough on him.
Yeah, I think Kissinger claimed credit for a lot of things that other people deserve. Guys like Al Haig. I think I mentioned last time that the White House was withholding word of an impending Arab sneak attack on Israel. We knew 4 days in advance. We never told the Jews. Golda Meir blamed Kissinger for making her hold back on mobilizing Israeli troops and letting the Arabs fire the first shot. Israel only got a warning a few hours in advance. And even then, there was a deliberate decision made by the Defense Department, with Kissinger's participation, to withhold, to delay the supply of arms to Israel. If it hadn't been for Al Haig smuggling the TOW missile to Israel,
yeah, we spoke about
it would have been overrun. Yeah, and that was a program that I participated on. Kissinger's...
Did you try and get in touch with Kissinger to get some...
he won't speak. When Seymour Hersh was doing his biography of Kissinger, someone at CIA told him that I had read all of Kissinger's intelligence files. And so Hersh came to visit me. And he never knew that Kissinger was a professional spy.
Neither did I until I read your book.
Oh, yeah. Henry Kissinger was a young sergeant in Army intelligence, but he got out really quickly and became a captain in the military intelligence
He was
service.
a teacher of intelligence, too, wasn't he?
Yeah, and the irony is that he was teaching in the same facility where we were recruiting Nazis. Now, I never found a document saying that Henry Kissinger personally participated in one of these Nazi recruiting programs, but he worked in the library where all those files were kept. He went from his covert assignment in Germany to Harvard, where he was on a special project to recruit foreign students as espionage agents. Then from there he became a consultant for Allen Dulles. He became a consultant for Nelson Rockefeller, people who were heavily involved with our covert operation schemes.
This is all documented.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Major television shows other than the Leon Charney Report bring you on to talk about this? I mean, this is your resurrecting history, or you're finding the truth about history.
You know, it's funny. Every time I've written a book, I've always had a major network show. My first book, we did CBS 60 Minutes. Mike Wallace got the Emmy Award. The next book about the Vatican, we did a segment with ABC Primetime. And this year, nothing. I don't know whether it's the O.J. Simpson trial or the subject matter is so sensitive. For the first time, someone is writing about what American policy really was. And the bottom line of the book is that for the last 70 years, we've been systematically betraying the Jewish people in order to ensure favoritism with the Arabs. You know, publicly we're Israel's allies. But privately, our intelligence policy is 180 degrees opposite. We'll give the Arabs anything they want. Let me give an example from the very beginning. American policy back after World War I was to get our oil companies into the Middle East at any price. And the price we paid was severe. We helped fund a group of terrorists. This was the Wahhabi sect, the most anti-Semitic group of the...
He became the king of Saudi Arabia from the Wahhabi sect. They're still around.
Ibn Saud. That's how we founded the king of Saudi Arabia. And their first job was to sign contracts with American oil companies. That's how we got our foothold in the Middle East. And so we paid that price even in the Gulf War. Jewish chaplains had to take the Star of David off their collar. Jewish American soldiers weren't allowed to go to a prayer meeting.
Jewish chaplains had to take the Star of David off during the Second World War?
No, in the Gulf War.
We were out there during the Gulf War.
Yeah, and Jewish American soldiers were not allowed to have public prayer meetings in Saudi Arabia. Did you know that?
We had a meeting on a ship, so I can't say if you're right.
Inside Saudi Arabia, the Jewish soldiers were told before they went to fight for Saudi Arabia, they could not hold a public prayer meeting.
But Catholics neither.
But
you Irish would have a terrible time in Saudi Arabia. You can't drink over there. Anyway, we got to cut for a commercial break, and we'll be right back to continue this journey through history with John Loftus, who has written The Secret War Against the Jews. It should be a bestseller. We probably, after this show, will be. We'll be back.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high to have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the backdoor channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at Audible.com or on iTunes. Discover the mystery of the Kaddish. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or Audible.com.
We're back. We're speaking with John Loftus and Mark Ahrens, but he's in Australia, who've written The Secret War Against the Jews. And this is part of our series of conversations with John Loftus about this resurrection of history. Or I don't know if is it a resurrection or is it the factual understanding of what happened?
Maybe it's filling in the blanks. I think about a third of modern history has been omitted. We're not saying that what you've heard before is false. But there are a lot of things left out because they were classified or sometimes because they were embarrassing.
Let me get to one personality we spoke about the last time, but let's get a little bit more in depth. Robert Maxwell. I checked your story out with some Israelis. They tell me John Loftus must be having Irish whiskey when he wrote that. They just didn't believe it. And these were pretty high-level guys. Now, you claim that Robert Maxwell was basically the savior of the Jewish people during 1948, when he managed to convey the importance of giving arms to Israel through his friend who was in a jail with him and became the foreign minister of Czechoslovakia, who was later killed. Yeah. And because of that, basically, he got a state funeral, and Jews forever should be in love and indebted to him. Now, I checked that out in Israel, and somebody said to me, that's a lot of caulk. And
So why did they give him the state funeral? Because he left Israel a lot of money?
No, because, yeah, he put a lot of money into Israel. He was invested in Cytex. He made a lot of money there.
The bulk of his money
He
was
rubbed up
supposed to go by...
elbows with Herzog, and he rubbed up elbows with Peres, Shimon Peres.
Hey, there's lots of bigger donors. His money was supposed to go to Israel in his will. He didn't have a penny left. His companies went bankrupt. The British people that I talked to, I had a very clear view of what Maxwell did. And people have never checked this out with the British Secret Service. Maxwell was the guy who made the introduction to the Czech socialists. That's why Czechoslovakia was the only nation in the world. It was a trade. Maxwell gave the Czechs something they needed to prevent a coup. And in return, the Czechs stuck their neck out. You know what happened to the Czech Jews and the Czech socialists? Stalin executed them all as spies for the British. Okay? It wasn't, they weren't charged as being spies for Israel. They were executed for being spies for the British. And that was one of the things.
Did you ever speak with Maxwell?
No, I spoke with his family.
So Maxwell's story is he was born as Lev Hoch, is that his name?
Oh yeah, Maxwell had a biographer. It was done in Britain some years ago, and I dug up a copy of it. Lev Hoch, he was born not far from where Elie Wiesel was born. His mother was a determined Zionist. Maxwell, as a kid, fought with the Czech army and was one of the few Czech soldiers to be evacuated at Dunkirk. Sad to say, the Czech officers left most of the Czech Jews behind. Maxwell and the other Czechs were furious when they got to England, and there was a big protest. And the Czech general said, everybody who feels that we were cowardly towards the Jews, step forward. Maxwell and Clementis stepped forward. They threw him in prison.
Yeah, you told me. That's where he met Clementis.
Yeah. So Maxwell, with the help of a lovely widow, who happened to be related to the British Army, got him out of prison, got him a job, and he went to work for the British Secret Service. Maxwell was a British Secret Service agent, and you better go back and check with your friends in Israel if they haven't realized that fact. He was the guy that was heavily involved in the 1947 Derchansky coup in Czechoslovakia. And that was what set up the year before.
What was the Derchansky coup?
The British Secret Service was trying to launch a coup inside Czechoslovakia.
They do those things?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Okay.
Maxwell's help tipped him off in advance. The Czech government monitored all the coup plotters, got all their documents, had all their mail. Caused a big stink in the Czech parliament in 1947, and the right wing was knocked out, the left wing came to power. That was
his friend at the end, Clementis,
yeah.
was shot or killed by Stalin? Executed, huh?
Sure. The last thing Stalin wanted was a bunch of independent socialists helping the Jews. Stalin wanted nothing to do with them.
Maxwell went on to become a member of the Knesset, the Parliament in London, in England. Great Britain it used to be, now it's England, and changed his name to Robert Maxwell, married a non-Jewish woman, had 2 non-Jewish children, and yet had the state funeral in Israel. Yeah,
if he hadn't made the connection for the Czech arms, Israel would have been swept into the sea. Every ally...
You really believe that, don't you?
Listen, this is not just me. This is what the generals of the time were saying. General Marshall was saying it's 700,000 Jews, 7 million Arabs. It'll be a walk. The British were not only giving...
George Marshall?
Yeah, yeah.
You have a story about George Marshall. We're going to skip around and have some fun with you. George Marshall told Harry Truman that if he was going to recognize the state of Israel, he would resign as the Secretary of Defense. Or
he was Secretary of the State, I think. Yeah, if Truman would recognize Israel, he would quit. And he was the second most popular man in America.
Right.
And he might take Truman with him. But Harry Truman was so angry at what the State Department had done to him.
They double-dealt him all the time.
Yeah. That Harry was a thick-headed guy.
You don't talk about Jacobson, the haberdasher, who managed to get Weitzman in there to speak to Harry Truman. You know that story?
Yes. We try to stay away from things that have already been published. That's true. And right after Harry Truman makes the promise to his friend that he will support the partition of Palestine, he picks up the newspaper the next day, and there's the State Department announcing to the United Nations that partition won't work. And we quote from Truman's diary that he never felt so double-crossed in his life. That there were second or third
Truman was a real hero to the Jewish people, no question about it.
Yeah, and Harry found out there was one thing: he couldn't control the State Department, but as President of the United States, he could officially recognize a country.
Okay, let's run back to Maxwell for a minute.
Yeah.
So, after Maxwell did his great duty to Israel, and let's assume you're correct, we'll just assume it because a lot of people contest it, a lot of people, Was he
Can you
very...
think of any other reason why Israel would have given this guy a state funeral after he was exposed as having stolen $4 billion?
I don't think he was exposed by the time he had the funeral. I think it was,
Oh, yes,
after,
he was.
after the funeral.
Oh, no, it had already started. It had already started. He was going downhill rapidly. The full amount of the money lost wasn't known until
we'll
afterwards.
have to check that out. I thought it was done after that. I don't think they would have done it.
No,
because
he was in
sort of
disgrace.
He was a disgraced man.
Yeah, he was in disgrace prior to the funeral.
How did he die?
The family says that he might have been murdered. I think what I was told...
By whom?
By a crew member. All right, I don't buy that. What I was told is that the British Secret Service finally twigged on to the fact that all these years that Maxwell was running front companies for the British Secret Service, he was helping pass information to Israel. And they finally twigged on when they had a defector about what he had done with the Czech coup.
The story
And so the British said, no more credit for Maxwell. They dried up the funding sources for him. And he
I could buy that theory, that if the what do they call M5?
MI6.
MI6. If they want to spread a rumor around that Rockefeller's broke, he's dead tomorrow, he gets no
That's right.
credit. If you want to do that to Maxwell, he can do that. I want
And
to
they
examine
did.
that with you. But it's an interesting story how Maxwell got into the publishing business.
Yeah, he left the British Secret Service, and all of a sudden had a contract with a German publisher, Springer Verlag, and they rounded up all these.
The famous Alex Springer?
Yeah. Former German scientists all of a sudden had their papers published. Maxwell's British partner, by the way, was the deputy head of the British Secret Service.
So
That's why.
was it a front or was
Sure
it a real
was.
company?
We had Operation Paperclip. We went and we recruited German scientists. The British had Maxwell's
But
operation.
did they let him make money?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, Maxwell finally bought the British Secret Service out, and he retained ownership of the entire company.
What, the British Secret Service?
Sure. There were two companies that merged, Springer Verlag and the one that the British Secret Service had set up, and they became Pergamon.
This is news to me. He had a put on the Secret Service stock. I never heard this before in my
Oh,
life.
we have front companies. Come on,
But
this is
can I get a
marvelous.
put to go to buy out the CIA on an airline? You know what a put is and a call?
Sure.
You know what derivatives are.
Yeah. Well, what do you think we did with the stuff that was left from Iran-Contra?
So maybe I want to buy a call on 2 airlines that are run by the CIA.
You've got to be in the right place at the right time.
You think I can get a deal?
I'd say the chances are slim to none.
Really?
Yeah. We don't do that for Israelis. Might do it for the Arabs. We don't do it for the Israelis.
What's interesting lately, recently, the New York Times, our great newspaper, had an article about Guatemala and the CIA, how they operate over there, which leads me to believe that a lot of people don't really know what's happening, because in that article, as I understand it, the President of the United States had no knowledge of what was going on. Is that what we call plausible denial, or they really don't know?
No, they really don't know. And instance after instance in our book, we talk about how the intelligence community was holding things back from the president, not letting the president of the United States know what they were doing. I mean, it started back when Harry Truman was president. The intelligence community thought that President Dewey would be in office.
Right.
So we had guys like Alan Dulles working on the Dewey campaign.
We're going to hit the Dulleses later. We're going to go through them. They're your favorite people.
Oh, yeah.
Do they have grandchildren today? And do you ever talk to their relatives and try and get confirmations?
You have to be very careful. I have promised everyone I've interviewed on the attorney-client privilege I will not ever comment on whether they have or have not given me an interview. That's one of the conditions. The other one is that everything I write has to get cleared by a CIA publication review committee. So, yeah, I've interviewed a lot of people.
So your book has been cleared by the CIA? We
Sure.
said
Everyone I write has to be. They were my clients, if you
and
will.
the way you keep the privilege is that you're an attorney,
Yeah.
so they're talking to you as attorney-client privilege.
Yeah, and under the Florida attorney-client privilege, it's very broad. I can't even be compelled to divulge their identities. So I'm a safe guy to talk to. And
Tell me the truth. You ever talk to a guy named Elliot Rose? That's my producer. He looks like a CIA guy to me.
well, unfortunately, I can neither confirm nor deny.
Can't confirm or deny it. Elliot Rose, he may be the spook.
No, we
in the
named-
wheel.
we named,
That's the Leon Charney report.
And we named several of the people, but did give us permission to come forward. There's one in the studio tonight. There's a gentleman here, Bill Gowan. Bill was an Army counterintelligence officer who was in Rome. His job was to catch Nazis. He had an agent retrieve the records of the Nazis who were being smuggled through the Vatican. He found out that the British were behind it. there's a good American try to do his job.
He's in the studio right now.
Yeah.
He's drinking a lot of whiskey.
No, Mr. Gowan doesn't do that.
Mr. Gowan will do that after you find all those things out. You get you lose hope in America when you see that.
Well, I mean, there's a guy that tried to do the right thing, and he paid for this with his career. So, I mean,
Angleton smashed him, right?
James Angleton, a wonderful hero of American television. The guy was a sleaze.
We're going to hold that for a minute, because James Angleton, if you didn't know it, and probably you don't, was in charge of the Israeli desk for 30 years and was perceived amongst the Israelis and the Jews who knew as the greatest friend of Israel. And you're going to find out a secret of secrets. He wasn't. He was basically, according to John Loftus, an anti-Semitic, pro-Arabist, and who furthered the conspiracy against the Jews. What a double take there. Leave us. Don't leave us. I mean, I'm mixed up myself. I'll be back right after commercial break.
We'll straighten you out.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high to have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the backdoor channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at Audible.com or on iTunes. Discover the mystery of the Kaddish. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or Audible.com.
We're back. I'm Leon Charney speaking with John Loftus, who's written The Secret War Against the Jews, and we're doing a two-part series and a call-in show with John, so you can express your feelings about this experience after you buy the book. You can find the book in Frankfurt, Germany, in Rwanda, Brunei, not too much in the United States. St. Martin Press, for some reason, I don't know, and I spoke to the people yesterday, have not pushed this book, which gets me a little upset, because I think a book like that, once you start to publish, I'm not telling you how to run your business, St. Martin's, but if you're going to publish a book, why don't you push it? Are you part of the conspiracy also?
Oh, wait a minute. Now, there's no conspiracy here.
Okay.
What we have is Americans don't buy a lot of hardcover history books, to be fair.
This is not a history book. This is a sensational revelation of one of the worst atrocities that took place in the history, and it's trying to get to the truth of it. This is not history.
But it takes time for something this horrible.
Are you going to defend the St. Martin's Press on this show? You should, by the way, because they have to sell your books.
Well, yeah, you put me on the spot here.
All right, I don't like to do that. But yes, I do. It's more interesting for television.
Okay.
St. Martin's, I don't know. I mean, sell the guy's book, because he's spent 12 years writing this book, and he put his kishkis in it. You know what kishkis is? Intestines. And it's a very serious book. I'm not kidding. I don't understand it. I don't understand publishers, why they do and don't push books. And I'm not per se critical of St. Martin's. If they say they've pushed it enough, okay, they pushed it enough. Maybe they think it's an old story. I don't know. But I know that a lot of people would like to see your book, and they don't get it in the bookstores.
I think what's happened is that word of mouth has started to spread, that the Jewish community is giving it wonderful reviews in the Jewish press. And it's a complicated story, and it's a long book, but I hope it's an interesting book, that for the first time, American Jews and Israeli Jews are going to find out this whole part of this secret history they never knew.
All right, let's go back to the beginning. Well, probably have to go back to Abraham and Ishmael, you know. But you start your beginning with Jack Philby.
Yep.
Super spies. These.
Yeah, how many people have ever heard his name? Jack Philby.
I thought it was a tonic. I thought it was a tonic.
Now, there's a guy who had more to do with setting the patterns of the Middle East than any other spy, any other politician practically, and few people have ever heard of him.
Right.
He was the man who defected from British intelligence and became a Muslim. He became the advisor to Ibn Saud. Jack Philby's the guy that brought in the American oil companies. He's the man that got the money to build up the Saudi Arabian political machine. And he's a man that hated Jews. Jack Philby was the guy.
Why? Any reason?
I think that...
it's always a pleasure to ask a non-Jew why there's anti-Semitism. You know?
I think the answer is literacy, to be honest with you.
Did you go to Catholic high school?
No, I went to Boston Latin School, and then Boston College, which is a Catholic school.
Right.
And
did they teach you that the Jewish problem with Jesus and the whole business?
I studied in college a little bit of religious history in the Middle East. And I take more of a social history that the Jews were the first religion to require literacy to practice their religion. You had to read the book. And that way you could keep your culture intact no matter which...
Yeah, you proved that in the beginning of your book, and it's an interesting theory. I think you ought to speak about it. Because they were the literate people.
Yeah, we Catholics didn't have priests that could read and write for a long, long time. You're the first guys that had public education. Written health codes. Isn't that what the kashrut tradition was? A way of keeping alive in the desert. And we envied you for it, because anyone that could read and write could do really well at farming. You'd know about. So that's why we banned Jews as farmers. We concentrated you in urban professions. Look at the Asians in California today.
Arik Sharon got out of that ban, you know. He became a farmer.
But anytime you have a tiny ethnic minority that values literacy, education, community self-help, the Asians in California now they're talking about quotas on kids, and there are too many valedictorians of Asian descent. Exactly what happened to Jews in this country in the 30s. And every time you get a smart, hard-working minority, it makes the rest of us look lazy.
So what is the cause of anti-Semitism? Jealousy?
I'm a cynic. I think the root of all racism is money. That people don't exploit racial differences until it becomes profitable to do so. Anytime you get a small group that starts to accumulate wealth from hard work, it's easy to take it away from them. Back in the 11th century, the French used to play yo-yo with the Jews. They'd ransom all their money, throw them out of the country, then ransom them back, and throw them out of the country. It happened over and over again.
Were you interested in the Jews in college, or?
The only thing I knew about the Jews was when I was in high school was that we wouldn't have an exam on a Jewish holiday. You know, nice kids, but no particular interest.
You had friends as Jews?
Oh yeah, sure.
So you were not particularly one way or another. It was like an Italian, a Jew.
No, the reason I joined the Nazi War Crimes Unit was I thought I would get a free trip to Germany out of it.
Is that right?
I thought it would look good in my resume.
Did you get one?
No, my first boss was in a...
So now I'm questioning your intelligence.
Well, that was the reason I got the job. They found I had some intelligence training when I was an Army officer, and although many people think military intelligence is a contradiction in terms, that's why I got the job. They wanted someone that could go down the vaults and look at these old files. So I got into it by accident. You know, I don't even like bagels that much. You know, but my mom says that the Irish are the lost tribe of Israel. Maybe there's some distant connection there, but
I think there is a connection. By the way, I felt when I was in Ireland, I felt the Irish people are very warm. It's a wonderful place, Ireland. Have you been there?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place, and you know, you get the same type of feeling if you go to Israel. There's a camaraderie, a coming together. Yeah. It's I never understood the Book of Kel. Do you understand the Book of Kel?
Well, see, we Irish pride ourselves on keeping civilization traditions alive during the Dark Ages. The Book of Kells was a beautifully illustrated book of some of the stories and the poetry at the time. We preserved a lot of the history. But when we Christians were having our Dark Ages, the Jews and the Muslims were having a golden age. In Spain, Jewish doctors and Arab scholars were...
Maimonides, yeah. Right. They were
the very words algebra, magazine, come from Arabic, and the Muslim religion is not anti-Semitic. It's only the recent fundamentalist interpretations that are anti-women, anti-Semitic.
You write about that in your book.
Well, it's funny. A lot of the old guys I met now have left the intelligence agencies, and they're teaching history or doing some research, and they have some unusual insights. Their explanation is this isn't conspiracy. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. The reason our intelligence services were so pro-Arab was they had the oil.
Money.
It was
greed.
just business. It was in the American national interest to get the oil.
You're very
The Jews were
emphatic
way.
in your book about the fact that Roosevelt promised Churchill that there would never be a Jewish state because of the interest of the oil companies.
No. That was Forrestal.
Forrestal, James Forrestal.
James Forrestal.
They named ships after him.
Sure, there's a big building in Washington.
What a waste.
Yeah, he was a
That's
madman.
about as big
The
a
guy
waste
went
as
insane.
Herbert Hoover building, you know?
The man who really started the Cold War and influenced American policy towards Israel was quietly going insane. And he
He
committed
shot himself, didn't he?
No, he jumped out the window.
I'm sorry.
He's crawling on the floor screaming the Jews and the communists are after him.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. And the last, he wrote a note, and the last was a poem by Sophocles, and the last word left out before he jumped was Nightingale. Nightingale was the code name for one of our Nazi recruiting operations. So I think some of the things that he had done had just driven him
He totally
mad.
flipped out.
Yeah. Several people
Took a bullet.
Yeah, that was Frank Wisner. He was the head of a State Department. With so many spy agencies, I found one.
How many suicides in the spy business? A lot?
Yeah, more than you think.
Really?
And the sad thing is, Leon, 99% of the people I met are good, decent Americans, believe in the Bill of Rights. I would recommend the CIA as a career to anyone. The problem is, you got a handful of people, the political appointees, who are in it for the money. And intelligence is the most valuable commodity in the world. It's more valuable than oil. And you get guys like Bill Casey or Alan Dulles, and they were crooks. It's not conspiracy, it's just a plain fact. These guys were crooks.
Tell me about Schultz. George Schultz.
George Schultz was a funny guy.
The Israelis love him.
They didn't at first.
No,
George
when he
Schultz
went in,
came from
Bechtel, no good. Cap Weinberger, Bechtel.
Bechtel is probably the most anti-Semitic corporation.
Big
in the
construction
United
company
States.
in Saudi Arabia and all over the world.
Yep. And they were fined for embargoing Jewish operations. Anyone associated with Bechtel was considered to be so pro-Arab as to be hopelessly anti-Israel. So when Secretary of State Schultz came in, the Israelis were nervous. But Schultz got so nauseous with all the broken promises from the Arabs that he actually became very friendly towards Israel.
Moshe Ahrens, whom I interviewed at the 92nd Street Y,
Decent guy.
a very right-wing, Zionistic, patriotic Jew, loves George Schultz.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a love affair.
I'll tell you
Separate
a story about George Schultz. When he left the Secretary of State and went back to Bechtel, he found out that Bechtel was building a chemical plant.
No, he didn't go back to Bechtel. He was Secretary of Labor and went back to Bechtel.
No, he left
Secretary
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State,
and then
after he left, and he went back to Bechtel?
Went back to Bechtel.
Really?
Yeah, and that's when he found that...
Moshe Ahrens, if you hear this, you're going to get upset.
No, he did a good thing. He found out that Bechtel had been building a chemical plant for Iraq, and the chemical plant was dual use. It could make precursors for poison gas. George Schultz told Bechtel to stop the contract.
Does he get a star, David?
Yeah, he gets a gold star beside his name. What type and size will leave
No,
for
I'm
others.
curious. The Jews, the Israelis really think that he was a very good friend.
I think they should. I think they should.
Yitzhak Rabin does too.
Yeah, I think another Bechtel guy, to go the
Cap
opposite,
Weinberger.
Cap Weinberger. I mean, even Ollie North admits that Cap Weinberger was, anytime Israel would come up, he was opposed to it. I mean, Weinberger...
Is Ollie North credible?
At the right times, I suppose. I think Ollie North's sin is just that his...
Would he meet with you, Ollie North?
Oh, no. I know too much about Ollie.
You think he has a IQ more than 100?
No, he's not a stupid man. It's just that his arrogance is only
110?
exceeded by his incompetence.
That's called
All right?
stupidity.
No, there are many brilliant people who are so arrogant that they think they can do more. And
Is that called hubris?
exactly. Very good. Hubris. Yeah.
Hubris. I got that word from
Ancient
My,
Greece. Overweening pride.
Overweening
That's the
pride.
definition of hubris, a classical fault.
We got to cut for a
impressive.
commercial break. Thank you. Maybe I'll get a show after this. We're having a lot of fun with John Loftus. It's a serious topic, but we think that we should bring it to you in a conversational way and skip around a little bit to give you a flavor of what the world looks like, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. And John is absolutely correct about George Schultz. When he came in, the Israelis were in a panic. They said, oh no, this guy comes from Bechtel. He's going to be anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, anti-everything. Wound up as one of the best friends of the Jews. And we'll talk about the Donald Duck president, Ronald Reagan. We'll be right back.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high. to have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the backdoor channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at Audible.com or on iTunes. Discover the Mystery of the Kaddish. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or Audible.com.
We're back. We're continuing our series with John Loftus, who's written The Secret War Against the Jews, and also Mark Ahrens. Is Mark Ahrens a Jew?
I think he had a great-grandparent that was Jewish. But Mark's family, believe it or not, has been on the political left in Australia for years.
Why wouldn't I believe it? I don't know.
Well, I'm sort of conservative Irish Catholic, so I thought Mark was a nice balance to the team. We worked together. We did a series of shows on Nazis in Australia, and it was sort of embarrassing because we're pointing out they were in Parliament. And Parliament did a big investigation, found out we were right, and we helped change the law down there. And they credit Mark and I with being the people that...
What does it mean to be a conservative Irish Catholic? You're pro-life?
No, I think that's something that 70% of Catholics in America say that it's a woman's choice. All right? I'm conservative on crime, conservative on government spending, moderate in defense and foreign policy, liberal on human rights and the environment. The last president I really liked was Jack Kennedy. He was the last president to balance the budget. Okay, Scoop Jackson probably would have been someone that I would have been very
Look at Kennedy's father. He wasn't so good.
No, Kennedy's father was a guy that
England ambassador. He basically.
But you know why that wasn't why the government of Israel endorsed Richard Nixon over Jack Kennedy. You know why?
Why?
Because they had a ton of dirt on Nixon.
And they could bribe him?
They could blackmail him.
Blackmail him?
And Nixon ended up giving Israel more arms than all American presidents combined.
True.
Okay, and here's why. Richard Nixon, when he was vice president, was the highest-ranking American official in charge of this freedom fighters program that turned out to be our little recruitment program for the Nazis.
Yeah, you talk about that. This is an ethnic program developed by the Republic. I told that to Rudy Giuliani the other day. He looks dour anyway, so he got more dour when he heard that, because here he thought he was going to run a Republican ticket.
Hey, listen, there's one thing that all Republicans and all Democrats can agree on, is that Nazis are bad. But you had a few people like Richard Nixon, and we were told by the British, these guys aren't really Nazis, they're nationalists from Eastern Europe, they're good fellas. And unfortunately, the guy telling us that was Kim Philby, the Soviet spy in Britain. So he didn't send us anti-communists, he sent us the dregs of the war criminals, all right? So, okay, so they came in by mistake. The crime was Nixon let them stay, all right? We found documents in Australian intelligence files, briefings from Nixon's State Department, admitting they knew where the Nazis were in America. But you know what? They were useful to get out the ethnic vote in 5 key states. The Eastern European fascist groups became Nixon's answer to the Jewish vote for the Democrats. He had lost the election to Jack Kennedy by 1%. Dewey had lost by 1%. And Nixon was going to make sure that he had the secret weapon ready. And so they rounded up all of these crazy ethnic groups that were fascist parties during World War II in Eastern Europe, and they brought them into the Republican National Committee in 1972. That was the payoff. For
and there's documents for this.
Yes. And you know who the guy was in charge of the Republican National Committee in 1972?
No, George Bush.
George Bush.
How'd I know?
Give the man a gold star.
Get gold star for Leon Charney. Yeah. George Bush.
He was the garbage man of the Nixon White House. Nixon one day had a rage. He said, fire everybody except Bush, because he'll do anything for us.
Is that right?
Yeah.
It's heavy stuff. You're listening to heavy stuff.
Yeah,
here.
why do you think George went from being head of the Republican National Committee to head of the CIA? When Liz Holtzman was starting up all this Nazi hunting, who was the guy at the CIA in charge of making sure Congress got zipped for the information?
George?
You betcha.
Preston?
Yeah, we actually found a document from the CIA to one of the Nazis at the time, saying, you know, we know that they're making inquiries about your background. Don't worry, we've taken care of it. There won't be any more problems with your immigration. Okay, so we get one unit of the government. My unit's out hunting Nazis, and these wackos around Bush's office are telling people, don't worry about it, they're safe.
So would you say Bush was anti-Semitic, or he just
No,
taking care of the greed boys?
George did what his friends told him to do. George is not anti-Semitic. I had someone go through his private files at Skull and Bones Club at Yale. George actually voted in favor of admitting Jews and blacks to the club. George's father and grandfather were a piece of work entirely. Not many people know this, but
They financed the Nazis.
yeah, George dropped out of college as a kid because he knew that his dad's companies were about to be seized as Nazi fronts.
Is that right?
Yeah, and they were.
We're hearing things here that'll make your hair stand
we
up.
know more
the
about-
barbers are going to do a lot of business after this show.
We know more about Kurt Waldheim's background than we do about George Bush's background.
Stonewalled? You can't get into it?
Oh, no. Well, the old spies interviewed said this is what George Bush did. And step by step along the way, we traced it with the documents.
So he was not anti-Semitic, that's
No,
for sure.
but he was anti-Israel. When the Israelis bombed the Osirak reactor, George Bush was pounding the table in the White House cabinet room, saying that
You're talking about Iraq?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the nuclear reactor. That,
right.
okay.
Begin did it.
Yeah. George Bush was pounding the table saying that the U.S. planes should bomb Israel.
Is that right?
That's right, and blow up the air base where those planes left from.
You got documents on that?
Yep, that's been quoted in several other histories. It's embarrassing, but it's true. Okay?
I'm stunned. I don't know where to go after this. Now, there was a man that we interviewed, Elliot and I were out in Houston, Texas, and Max Fisher, a very prominent Jew, very prominent Republican, and dedicated Republican. These guys were swearing up and down that George Bush was the greatest thing since hummus to Israel, you know. And the man who followed him was George Klein, another prominent American Jew. They all swore that George Bush was the greatest thing, and he had to be the President of the United States.
Richard Nixon laughed one day and told one of his friends that if he dropped an atom bomb on Israel, there would still be Jews in America stupid enough to vote for him. Okay? Just because you're born Jewish doesn't mean that you're
smart.
Yeah. Now, I'm an equal opportunity basher. There were bastards on the Democratic side as well. Lyndon Johnson was an oil man.
Yeah, we're going to talk about him.
Yeah.
He was a duplicity guy, wasn't he?
Yep. Lyndon Johnson, it was a classic example, pretended to be a friend of Israel.
Yeah, big.
Privately, we were spying on the Israelis in time of war and betraying her secrets to the Arabs.
The Liberty
The
ship.
Liberty incident.
We're going to talk about the Liberty incident.
Yeah. Now, there's an example.
The Liberty, by the way, was a ship that was bombed by the Israelis. It was an intelligence ship during the Yom Kippur War, I believe, wasn't it?
The 67 war,
67 war, excuse me. And it's been an incident that's washed over by everybody. No one really likes to talk about it. The truth is that there was surveillance. They were really telling Arabs where every division and every command post was in Israel. Am I right?
Well, it's a little trickier than that.
Well,
the Liberty had
it's terrible enough.
Yeah, we were spying on you. The Israelis had won a big victory in the Sinai, and they're getting ready to pull their units out to go to the Golan, to go to Jerusalem. And the Liberty's job was to listen for all the Israeli units coming up on that road near the Gaza, because for 25 miles, it could pick up even tank radios. Okay?
Yeah, I know.
So we could tell whose voices, whose tanks. We could tell the Arabs which Israeli units pulled
So
up.
who ordered the bombing? The Israeli government?
The Israeli cabinet, yeah.
Yeah.
They met and said, look.
Could you get anybody to confirm that?
Yeah, I went to Israel precisely for that point. I met people on both sides.
You want to divulge who confirmed it?
No.
Please.
Well, one guy was, he's now dead. There was a general who was in the war room who told several younger soldiers exactly what had happened.
What's his name?
The mind goes first.
Is it in your book?
No. No.
You didn't want to talk about it.
No. But look,
That's a big issue, by the way.
Israelis know more about really having liberty than Americans do.
I know.
Okay?
I think the Israelis
didn't
they
want to sink the
compensated.
ship.
They compensated the families.
Lyndon
didn't they?
Johnson told the Israeli government that
We'll pay you. You pay them.
yeah, under the table, pretend it's a mistake. As Lyndon Johnson was caught spying on Israel in time of war. The Israelis could have sunk the ship with one bomb. They just wanted to knock out the spy gear. And that's what they did. 90% of the crew survived. And then the Israelis told the Americans what they didn't want.
You write in your book that they try to be humanitarian about it, and they try not to kill any American soldiers.
Yeah, they strafed the ships so the soldiers would button up the decks. They burned off the antennas with napalm.
And you talked to some of the sailors and people who were on that ship, didn't you?
Yeah. I remember, I just got a letter from one guy who was an officer on the Liberty, and he said, in my chapter of the book, I had some of the communications gear on. What the Liberty did was to bounce its transmissions off the moon back to Cheltenham, Maryland. Okay?
Right.
That was how we passed it back. And then apparently from there off the moon again to Britain. Then Britain used a landline to Cyprus where their spy base was. As I had heard that it was a British base in Cyprus that was directly passing the stuff to the Egyptians. Lyndon Johnson didn't know that the Israelis had a spy in the Egyptian General Staff.
But I did. I represented him. His name was Lusty Rutz, and he's dead now. He's called the Champagne Spy, and Israel traded 5,000 to 1. He infiltrated the entire hierarchy of the intelligence of Egypt, and he was a blonde man who came from Germany. He looked like he was a German, and married a German woman. Fantastic. You ought to buy the book if you can. Find it. It's called The Champagne Spy. It's by Rusty Lutz, and so we knew that.
Yeah, the Israelis had, in the 67 war, a good intelligence service. You didn't have it anymore in the 73 war. The Arabs threw all of the Jews they could out of their country, sent them back to Israel. They changed their communications codes. They left Israel in the dark. The only ones who knew in 73 that Israel was going to be attacked were us. We broke the codes. We were reading the Soviet embassy codes in Lebanon, talking about we've got to get ready to pull out because Israel will be attacked on this day at this hour. And that's the information we held
So the
back.
United States deceived Israel during the Yom Kippur
Not
War.
the United States.
Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah, well, yeah, in 67 is Lyndon Johnson. That's right, because even guys in the CIA
And Richard
didn't know.
Nixon in 73 with Henry Kissinger.
Yeah, these weren't American programs. These were a couple of guys that were doing favors
The
for the
age
oil
of deception.
companies.
All right, we got to finish this segment of our series with John Loftus.
The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Hi, I'm Leon Charney, and this is the Leon Charney Report. And if you remember last week, we promised you some more titillating anecdotes and conversations and historical things that you probably never knew about the Jews and the conspiracy against the Jews by the Western democracies, so-called democracies. And it's with John Loftus, and it's called The Secret War Against the Jews. St. Martin's Press at your local bookstore. John, we left off last week with some conversation about Georgie boy, George Bush. You have a chapter, I think, it's called George's Inner Sanctum. What did you mean by that?
There was a Vice President George Bush had his own spy office in the White House.
Did Reagan know that?
Reagan signed a national security order, of which I have a copy.
Did he know what he signed?
Reagan was a nice guy who read his speeches well, but I don't think he quite knew what he was doing. Years later, when Bush shifted the blame from his vice president's office back to Reagan's staff, Reagan caught all the blame for Iran-Contra. And that's why I'm told that Reagan told Bill Clinton when they first met that that's why Reagan voted for him. And that's why Nancy
Reagan voted for whom?
Clinton.
He did?
Told Clinton that.
Is that public?
Yeah, it was one of the White House staffers leaked it right after it happened.
Really?
And why do you think that Nancy publicly opposed Oliver North and had to be dragged to give
In the
stand behind her
senatorial
husband?
election, you mean?
Yeah, and had to be dragged beside her husband to endorse Bush's run for the presidency. George Bush was the guy who ran covert operations for the Reagan administration. He was a former head of CIA. Casey needed a place where they could run programs.
Bill Casey, the CIA director.
Yep.
Dead.
Dead. Casey knew that he couldn't run a lot of covert ops through CIA because the guys in CIA would tell Congress. By and large, most of the people in CIA are law-abiding and they follow the rules.
All right, who was in his inner sanctum?
Donald Gregg reported to Bush, and the documents show that the guy in charge of contacts was Oliver North.
Who was Gregg?
Don Gregg was a former CIA officer who had served with Gregg previously. And
With
Gregg
who?
had,
With Bush, you mean?
with Bush, and had known North from the Vietnam days. But, you know, Gregg was one of the old boys that came in from CIA with Bush. Now, North is on the documents as working for Bush in 1982. Now, North has publicly denied ever having been in Bush's chain of command. The new documents we got out show that North is a liar.
Do you think he'd be known in the community for his veracity after his testimony before the Senate committees?
Ollie has a short and selective memory.
I'm not sure he has a short or selective. I don't know what he has.
He is a guy that has made more blunders and gotten away with it. My favorite...
A lot of people got killed because of Ollie North, I think. Am I right? Amiram Nir.
Amiram Nir. I don't know.
Israeli was for Shimon Peres the terrorist in charge of terrorism for Shimon Peres while he was prime minister. Died somehow in Mexico in a plane crash.
Yeah, he was one of 7 people who had short and unexplained deaths. But I think the gossip isn't only that, is that that was arranged by British intelligence. I'll tell you why I say that. In North's declassified diary is a memo from North of a conversation with Amiram Nir. Amiram. And Nir says, I have met with this Syrian agent, and he has told me all about the British connection. All right? The address that Nir gives is a fortress-like residence in Marbella, Spain. That's the home of Monzer Alcazar. North had one of the leading Syrian terrorists in the world on his payroll. Nir didn't know who Alcazar was because the Mossad was trying to penetrate Alcazar's operation. The Mossad had 2 agents killed trying to get close to the guy. Here's Nir meeting with him because he's working with North on the Iran-Contra deal.
So the Mossad was chasing this guy and Nir's in a meeting with him?
Mossad was chasing him. Interpol was chasing. We had an entire Interpol conference about...
And who arranged that meeting? Ollie North?
Yeah, and it's in North's diary. Nir is meeting with Monzer Alcazar, reporting on the progress of trading arms to Iran. See, before the Israelis were brought in, we brought you guys in as the scapegoats for the Iran hostage deal.
I'm American, like you are.
Well, okay, but
I'm not nervous. I can't talk anymore.
We were using the Syrians as our secret conduit for laundering arms to Iran. That's what Vice President Bush's job was.
You were using the Syrians to launder arms to Iran.
That's right. And it was a scandalous operation.
And so you shifted the blame onto Israel.
Yeah, we had to, because North, nor Nir, had ever done a background check on Monzer Alcazar. The Mossad could have told him. The CIA could have told him who Monzer was. Everybody. Reader's Digest had an article describing Monzer Alcazar as horrible terrorist. Can you believe it? Any dentist office in America knew more about Monzer Alcazar than Oliver North.
Believe. No, it's really hard to believe. Are you sure?
Yeah.
You know who Joe Palooka was? Dick Tracy? Batman?
Listen.
What happened to this?
The hardest thing for people to believe is that our intelligence community could be so stupid as to do these things.
I want a reduction in my taxes.
Well, it's,
I mean, I'm like you are. I'm economics.
We had a Syrian terrorist on the payroll.
Okay, so you had a Syrian terrorist on a payroll. What happened to this guy?
Oh, he was great. While he was working for Oliver North, he was charged with hijacking the Achille Lauro. As a matter of fact, he was just tried for that in last month in Spain, but he was acquitted. It wasn't surprising. On the first day of court, Monzer got up and threatened to expose a scandal in the Spanish government. The prosecution's chief witness fell out a window. Another one had his kids kidnapped. All the American DEA evidence was excluded from evidence. So he walked. So, I went to the guy who was in the CIA and I showed him all these documents, payment records, $1 million at a time to Monzer from North Swiss bank account.
What did they say?
He's stunned. He couldn't believe it.
Really?
He was sick.
So who knew about this? Did George Bush know about it? It's hard to know.
It's hard to know. The White House diaries show that North was putting together this crazy kidnap plan. He wanted to go kidnap terrorists. All right? And the paperwork on the plan, the North Diary shows that it went to Gregg to be approved by Bush. I can't prove that George Bush signed off on it. But what happened immediately afterwards is that Bill Casey picked one of his old buddies to go to Lebanon to begin recruiting for the program.
Is that Buckley?
That's why Buckley, yeah, when Buckley was kidnapped.
The fellow was assassinated.
Yeah, but he was tortured to death first by one of Monzer's associates. They put balloons down Buckley's throat. They could increase the air pressure and torture him from the inside so the bruises wouldn't show. And they were getting every dirty trick that Buckley knew about Casey and Bush. And Buckley spilled everything.
So they debriefed him.
Totally.
In a terrible
But they went too far. They traumatized his lungs, so Buckley developed massive pneumonia and drowned in his own fluids. But that's why Bush was so adamant to pay any price to ransom Buckley back. And so we were paying a Syrian terrorist to ransom our own
So
hostage.
that's the way North got to the Syrian terrorists.
Yeah.
And then he tried to use them for other things.
Yeah. But there was one screw-up. The first arms...
Wasn't Khashoggi involved in this thing at all?
Peripheral player. Yeah, he was involved in the financing on the
Swimmer?
side. Those guys were on the Israeli side. They were brought in as the scapegoats. We asked the Israelis to smuggle low-level stuff, old spare parts for Hawk radars, the obsolete version of the TOW. Okay, we gave you guys, the Israelis, the junk to send through.
Who asked the Israelis to do this?
Bill Casey.
Casey.
Yeah, there's a good Israeli book on this that talks about Casey asked the Israelis 4 or 5 times, and they kept turning him down. All right? It wasn't an official American-approved program.
Basically, the Israelis liked Casey.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
They did. They thought he was a strong operator for them. Well, he was working under Reagan. The Israelis basically liked Reagan because he armed them to the teeth. Ronald Reagan was thought of very highly by a lot of top Israelis because he armed them very well. And I got to believe that Reagan was a pro-Israel person. I
think Ronald Reagan in his heart was, but there were a lot of people around. Reagan delegated his power.
Yeah.
Foreign policy, covert operations, that went to the vice president and to George and to Baker.
Well, he had an astrologer with his wife. She did everything.
But I mean, the people under Reagan were vehemently anti-Israel.
You're talking about
Baker?
Clark was in there at that time. You know him?
Yeah. Well, Clark, less
Talking
so.
about Baker, Ed Meese. You got anything on Ed Meese? I mean, why leave anybody out?
There was some suspicion on the part of the special prosecutor that Ed Meese may have been intricately involved in the cover-up.
No proof.
Not indictable proof. You know, I'll be honest. I never liked Ed Meese. I figured his only qualification was Attorney General was a brief.
I got a feeling that he feels the same about you.
Yeah, it's.
And he's the third. You're only John Loftus, so be careful. We'll be back in 1 minute after a commercial break to continue with John Loftus and our series on the secret war against the Jews. What a book! What a book! I'm telling you, it's spellbinding. So if you're not watching the show or after the show, go out and buy it. We'll see you in a minute after commercial break.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high. To have this courageous man and my close men killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the Backdoor Channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at Audible.com or on iTunes. Discover the mystery of the Kaddish. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening, a book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or audible.com.
We're back. We're continuing our conversation with John Loftus, who's written The Secret War Against the Jews. And I think it's the first time in the history of this show that we've had 3 consecutive shows about a topic, but this is the world. I mean, this is not just a topic. So Bush is, you've wiped him out. Let's see. Let's go to the Vatican. Let's travel around a little bit. How about the popes? How good were they to the Jews?
This is embarrassing for me.
A lot of Nazi channels, huh?
Well,
you must feel perturbed about that as an Irish Catholic.
It bothered me a lot. I think that, to be fair, though, there's been a real rumor that, like, Pope Pius XII was pro-Hitler and liked the Nazis during the war. The intelligence files show the opposite. The Pope was trying to ransom Jews and was actually working with the British Secret Service to assassinate Hitler. It didn't work out. What the Pope did after the war was obscene. The British Secret Service asked the Vatican to set up a smuggling conduit to smuggle the Nazis out. And the Vatican, well, 99% of the Catholic Church was involved. But yes, this tiny group of Italian clerics were
smuggled Nazis out?
They had a whole network.
To where? Argentina?
Argentina, Australia, Canada,
Syria?
the United States,
Egypt?
Syria. Yeah. I mean, Simon Wiesenthal was wrong. There was no Odessa system. There was the British Secret Service in the Vatican. It was called Project Ratlines. The Nazis came from Austria and Italy down to Genoa. They had fleets of ships that took them around the world. Now, I know this sounds bizarre, but I had an agent who spoke Croatian, and we had him pretend to be a young fascist. And we had him tape record all of the surviving priests who worked in the Nazi smuggling program. And they all bragged about what they had done with the British to rescue the Nazis.
Why would a priest brag about that?
This was how they had saved these brave fellows who were, after all, good Catholics.
Nazis?
Yeah, they were Nazis. But they were anti-communist.
How many Catholics were Nazis?
Unfortunately, a lot. Most
Really?
of the Central European nations were Catholic, yeah.
What happens if you have you
Monsignor Tissot?
have you? Yeah, we know a few of them. Have you approached the Vatican on this at all?
Yeah,
No comment.
There was one. Well, we did a book I should explain called Unholy Trinity, which is this book builds on it. We had all of the British and American records. Mr. Gowan, for example, who's in the studio tonight, had an agent who went into the Vatican and found the Vatican's records of Nazi smuggling. Mr. Gowan investigated it. They were going to arrest one of the top Nazis, Ante Pavelic, from Croatia, living in the Vatican. And orders came down to the Americans, hands off. But guys like Mr. Gowan, the Nazi hunters, they came too close. And their careers were ruined. But the State Department, Alan Dulles and his friends, took over the Nazi smuggling program in the Vatican from the British. We gave it a new code name, Operation Headache Boat Hill. And that's how we got rid of guys like Klaus Barbie.
Let's talk about the Dulles boys. They practically ran the nation under Eisenhower because one was Secretary of State, the other guy was head of the CIA. And they were basically Wall Street lawyers who really were interested in oil and greed. This is what you point out in your book.
Yeah.
And they didn't care how they achieved their ends. No means was impossible for them. Were they basically anti-Semitic or just greedy?
I think just greedy. Before he died, I interviewed Justice Goldberg.
Author.
Yeah. He had been an intelligence officer.
Right.
He knew the Dulles brothers. And his opinion was the Dulles brothers were traitors.
You got that on a record?
Yeah. Within... they gave aid and comfort to the enemy in wartime. The Dulles brothers represented most of the American investors who moved the money from the American Depression. They invested in Germany. 70% of the money that went to build up the Third Reich's war machine came out of the U.S. The Dulles brothers were in the thick of it, along with Bush's grandfather.
You claim they even were involved with some of the Nazi intelligence characters.
Yes. There was a very controversial Nazi record that was found after the war. Prince Hohenlohe, who was an SS officer, and of his meetings with Alan Dulles. And they were negotiating ways to form an alliance between the Nazis and England to go against the Russians. Dulles wasn't authorized to do any of this. And he was just, The Jews didn't ignore Dulles. He was frankly anti-Semitic in his comments.
Dulles and Eisenhower stopped the Israelis in 1956 during that war, when the Suez War.
We betrayed.
When Israel, the French, and the British had a secret deal, and Eisenhower really came down very hard against the Israelis at that time, especially Dulles. Was Eisenhower part of this play?
Eisenhower was like Reagan. Okay, he wanted
golf.
plausible deniability. Let me go play golf. We had two Dulles brothers, Alan, the CIA guy, is talking with the British, saying, "Oh, this sounds great. You and the Israelis are going to take over the Suez Canal, and you're going to boot all the Nasser out. Sounds good. Sounds good." A little wink and a nod. The British think they have clearance. As soon as the British go in, John Foster Dulles, Allison's brother, who is Secretary of State, says, "Oh, this is terrible. No one told me about it." And so the Americans embargo all sorts of things. The British pound goes down the toilet, and we come out on Nasser's side. So we sandbagged the British, we sandbagged Israel, and we got our little foothold in Egypt. A lot of good it did us.
Didn't help.
No, no.
Rockefeller, Nelson.
Nelson Rockefeller. Now, there was a piece of work. In his youth, Nelson Rockefeller actually went to the White House and said, "I want Roosevelt to give me Latin America because there's going to be a war coming up, and we can steal all of the British markets in Latin America."
For what?
The American business.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
Screw the British are fighting the Nazis. We can make a profit here. All right? For whatever reason, Nelson Rockefeller ended up being our intelligence chief in Latin America during World War II. And he made a profit in both sides of the war. The Standard Oil Company and some.
How do you confirm this? You got any notes on this?
Sure. There have been a couple of authors now that have gone through the recently declassified files for Standard Oil, which, by the way, was tried. You know, some of these companies, like Texaco after the war, were found by U.S. courts to have given collaboration to the Nazis. I mean, the records became public. There were hearings held in the Senate. This was a minor national scandal. To this day, Texaco has the Texaco Opera Hour. That was their first public relations thing to atone for all the bad PR that they were getting. Yeah, this really happened. We had American companies that.
All right, so
dollars iberalis.
Rockefeller's now got a lot of friends in Latin America. Palestine is to be partitioned around November 1947.
Yeah.
Israel's in big trouble. Palestine, the Jewish agency basically was in big trouble. Ben-Gurion was really in trouble. So he sends over some guys to have a heart-to-heart talk with Nelson and say, "Look, we're going to expose you, Nelson, and show you're basically a Nazi lover unless you grab 5 more votes from Guatemala, from Chile, from who knows what." Is that the story?
Well, somewhat. Not that he was a Nazi lover, but that he was a Nazi supplier, and he dealt with the Nazis. And they basically said to Nelson, "You've got 3 days before the vote. We know that we have to."
You know the Israeli who was there?
There was an assistant to Reuven Shiloah.
Shiloah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Shiloah was one of the first one of the founding members of the intelligence in Israel. Yeah. A very great man.
Yeah, and
so they
hugely supportive of America. So the Shiloah strategy was that to put the pressure on Rockefeller, because in 3 days Rockefeller turned around every nation in Latin America. They either voted in favor of Israel or abstained.
That's a fact.
Yeah, that's how they reached the 2/3 majority.
So it was a blackmail in a sense.
Yeah. But Rockefeller had a blackmail in return. He said to the Israelis, "Look, if we do this, there will never be any Nazi hunting in the government of Israel. You can have vengeance, or you can have a country, but you can't have both." And it was a devil's bargain, but what choice did Ben-Gurion have?
Is that why so no more prosecutions of Nazis other than Adolf Eichmann by the Israeli government?
Yeah. Eichmann was an exception. He was a mass murderer, and it was thought enough time had passed since Rockefeller that it wouldn't be a problem. But to this day, Israel has no central index of wanted Nazi war criminals. They had no central office for hunting Nazis. And to be fair, it wasn't their job. Hunting Nazis was a job for countries like ours that gave them shelter.
Wiesenthal, have you met him?
Yes, several times.
Was he effective?
Good man, but I think that Simon Wiesenthal was constrained.
Well, he didn't have funding, and it was limited.
The Israeli point of view at the time was, we don't want to open the Nazi question. So there were some Nazis that Simon Wiesenthal did not go after. I read Simon Wiesenthal's FBI file.
The French woman who's not Jewish, Nazi hunter.
Beate Klarsfeld.
Yeah, you met her too?
No, never met her. No.
Interesting lady.
Yeah.
Fascinating lady.
Yeah.
All right, we're down to Palestine is now partitioned. Israel's now going to war, and there are 100 million Arabs against, at that time, about 800,000 Jews. How'd they win the war?
It was the Czech arms that were airlifted, and we had an American air base inside the Iron Curtain. American cargo planes were flying airplanes in. The Czechs built the Messerschmitt fighter for the Nazis. It was a really good one. So they took the wings off and packed the planes inside these American cargo planes and flew them to Tel Aviv. And it was that instant Israeli Air Force that actually stopped the Egyptian tanks.
You remember the name of Bevan, the Foreign Secretary of Britain?
Yeah.
Big anti-Semite?
Yeah, I'm afraid he was, quite a bit. Most of these guys were just businessmen, all right? The joke was if Moses had turned right and settled in Kuwait, it would be a big fight between Britain and the United States to see which would have Israel become part of our nations, whether Israel would have been the 51st state or part of the Commonwealth. But Israel had no oil.
All right, we got to cut for commercial break, and we'll come back with John Loftus with the secret war against the Jews. But I'm going to talk about this interesting posing of a British spy, so to speak, at the CIA in Washington all the time, or Virginia, wherever they are, and the same thing for an American in London or wherever they are. And what they do is they send intelligence back to these people, so they don't need a warrant to try and tape your telephone conversations. Heavy stuff. We'll be back.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high to have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the Backdoor Channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at Audible.com or on iTunes. Discover the mystery of the Kaddish. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or Audible.com.
We're back. We're continuing our conversation with John Loftus, the second in a series of conversations. You've seen him last week, you see him now, and you will see him next week, and you will see him live. We will go live and take questions from the audience, because I'm sure many of you have a lot of questions to ask John Loftus about what happened in the world since Ibn Saud took over Saudi Arabia. And what happened to George Bush. By the way, George Bush, you told me his son now has an exclusive contract to rebuild Kuwait?
Yeah, there's not rebuild all of Kuwait, but he got a very nice, juicy contract and managed to beat out all the other bidders, despite the fact that his company had no expertise whatsoever in...
That's public knowledge.
Yeah, that's public knowledge. Yeah. So...
it's a little sickening, isn't it?
To the victors go the spoils.
Terrible, terrible story. Israel was founded... We're now back to Ben Gurion, he was a clever man, obviously.
Yeah. Well, there were hard times.
And let's talk about James Angleton, who many think was a super spy. He held the Israeli desk, and the Israelis thought he was the best thing since whipped cream and lox and bagels.
Well, I'll just say Israeli intelligence doesn't feel that way. James Angleton was a guy who, for all of his life, had the Vatican, the Israeli desk. The early Zionists caught Angleton smuggling Nazis. All right. Angleton's father was an admitted fascist, and he was involved in the smuggling the Nazi money out. Angleton was trapped, and so the Zionists made a deal. For every truckload of the Nazis you bring out a truckload of Jews. All right. Angleton was in a hard corner. Angleton's patron at that time was Allen Dulles, and they had to be very sensitive about this because Truman got reelected. This was a big surprise. They thought President Dewey was going to be in. So Angleton's job was to keep the Israelis quiet, not to bring out this ugly little chapter. And so for all of his life, Angleton kept this deal. But what, in effect, it was the Israelis were blackmailing Angleton, right? Because they had him caught with the Nazis, and Angleton was desperately looking for some way to get even. Now, after Angleton was fired from CIA, they went through his files and found out.
Why was he fired, by the way?
Spying on people, Operation Chaos. He was opening mail, listening to phone calls, and what no one realized was it was aimed primarily at Jews, at American Jews. Angleton was keeping an index of Jews in the American government and classifying them according to their degree of Jewishness. That would depend, how much time we should spend wiretapping. To put it bluntly, Angleton was one of those guys who quietly went mad at CIA. He should have been fired years ago. But he was an evil, evil guy.
What happened to him? He died?
Yeah.
Natural death?
Yeah.
Terrible, terrible story.
Yeah.
And you mean the Israeli intelligence knew about his background? That's why, in a sense, they could blackmail him too.
Mm-hmm.
So Israel survived by a lot of blackmail, according to you.
Well, you didn't have an army. You didn't have oil. You had a small home defense force that was very brave, but often undermanned. You had to make do with the best of what they had, and they did pretty well.
How did the Israelis manage to track all these things? I mean, they were a really small unit in the 1940s. There was Haganah then, and there was no army. It was just defense forces, Palmach.
I think you do what you have to do. Once you're the victim at the center, you know that there's nothing you can do but fight or die. It makes your choices a lot easier. And there were a lot of people, Jewish and non-Jewish, who felt horrified, and they were quietly helping the Israelis with information, with intelligence. There was one guy in Germany who was keeping track of a lot of the Nazis that were popping around and passing word to his Zionist friends. And what happened is one day, Zionist intelligence walked into a place called Pullach, a little compound in Germany, where we had dumped all of the German intelligence officers, all the Nazis that, well, honest to God. That's where the West German Intelligence Service was founded. The Mossad moved in. That's where they received their first professional training. They knew where all the Nazis were in the German intelligence service, and that's why no Israeli spies have been arrested in West Germany, and why Israeli intelligence was able to piggyback on everything that West German intelligence was doing.
You have a story in your book about the communist Jewish spies that really betrayed everybody.
Yeah, we started that in the last book. This is an amazing story. During World War II, the Nazis had a super spy ring, and it was codenamed Max, the maximum secret. And it was supposed to be a ring of white Russian Nazis who were spying for Hitler inside Stalin's military headquarters. Well, when the Nazis investigated, they found that the spy ring was actually run by Jews. And what was this? Fascist Jews. They were supposed to be helping Hitler because they wanted to keep their families from the concentration camps. Well, this Max spy ring was incredible. Every day they were giving Hitler's generals the entire Soviet order of battle. It was brilliant. And
Disinformation.
No, correct information.
Right.
Well, 99% of the time.
Right.
Yeah, except on certain days, like the Battle of Kursk, the Battle of Stalingrad. They weren't fascist Jews at all. They were working for Allied intelligence. They were working for Soviet intelligence.
And they were connected to Palestine? Or
yeah, they were actually three sides. Hitler's generals thought that they were working for the Nazis.
Stalin
thought they were working for him, for Soviet intelligence.
Ben-Gurion thought he had a spy network, and he did.
And so Ben-Gurion went to Stalin after the war and said, Ben-Gurion's agents, and said, we'll keep quiet about this, but we want something in return. We want a country.
And you want recognition, and Russia did recognize you.
Recognize? Russia led the charge in the UN for the partition of Palestine.
Exactly.
They reversed, 40 years of Soviet anti-Semitic history in the Communist Party. Stalin used to denounce
Well, why would
Zionism.
Stalin care if the Israelis knew?
If the Israelis talked, Stalin was trying to peddle this Max network to British intelligence and the CIA. All right?
Right.
So, and he did.
And basically they were Israeli agents, in a sense, at least leaking to Israelis.
What happened is, as soon as the vote for Israel went through, and they didn't need Stalin anymore, the Israelis told the Americans what was going on. All right? And to our shame, we didn't believe the Jews. Allen Dulles brought the Max network into the CIA during the Eisenhower administration.
There's documents on all this?
Yes. I have 3 volumes that were top secret files were recently declassified. We used the Max network. The American name for it was NTS. That was this group of freedom fighters we had. The leader of the Max network was a long-term Soviet agent. All right? Even after the Jews warned us, we continued to use the White Russian side of it.
So they didn't want to believe the Israelis.
Teddy Kollek went into the CIA and told Angleton, this guy Kim Philby in British intelligence is a communist. They laughed it off. They laughed it off.
Teddy Kollek was originally a Mossad agent, wasn't he?
And before there was a Mossad,
Before,
Teddy Kollek was
in the
a
old
spy.
days. Nice man.
Yeah.
Great man.
Yeah, he was. He is.
All right. Did you ever talk to any of these old spies who worked in the Max connection or Max operation?
I interviewed the Americans who worked with them.
Did they emigrate to Israel or they stayed in Russia?
One of them did, but it was a very sensitive subject, and until the American files were declassified, no one in the world spoke about it. Because the leader of Max, Prince Anton Turkel, a white Russian fascist, betrayed all of our CIA codes. He broadcast them prematurely in 1956, and the people of Budapest raced into the streets thinking the Americans are coming to liberate them from the Russians, and all there were in the suburbs were Russian tanks waiting to crush them.
Does your book in any way come to the conclusion that the Holocaust could have been averted or avoided?
Yeah, I think we quote one of the British generals who said if we had been asked to launch a rescue plan, we could have done it. I saw the classified records where Roosevelt wanted to know why we couldn't do something. I mean, we were having empty ships coming back from Europe. We'd send ammo over and the ships coming in. We could have taken the Jews in. My God, we took in, by World War II, we must have had, what, nearly 5 million Jews in this country? They're, what, 6 million now?
Probably. No, it's 10 million, I think. I don't know, but
Yeah.
okay.
But most of the Jews alive in the world live in America because we saved them in World War I. World War II, we didn't. We needed the manpower. We should have taken them in. But the British didn't want to.
Because of the oil.
The British didn't want. The British put it this way: if we pressure Hitler too hard to release the Jews, he'll probably do it. And where will the Jews go?
Is that right?
Yeah, it was cynical. I said in my book.
And Churchill felt the same way?
I'm afraid so. Churchill was reading the weekly reports of the SS mobile killing units. That was the first ultra code that was broken. When I went through American files, you know when we learned about the Holocaust? The earliest report I saw was dated September 1941. I was reading weekly body counts of the number of Jews being killed.
In the files,
Yeah.
secret files.
Yeah, and the U.S. military attaché in
So
Moscow.
there's no question that Roosevelt knew it.
No.
But Roosevelt had a lot of Jewish people around him. He had Morgenthau, he had Bernie Baruch, he had, I forgot, the judge, Rosamond. Did they know?
I don't know. I don't think that they were in on the ultra side of it. I don't think that they knew.
Did Herbert Hoover know? You don't know.
I can't say for sure. The top leaders of Allied intelligence knew for certain what was happening.
We didn't have a CIA in 1941, though.
No, we had U.S. Army military attachés in Moscow. Those were the files I was reading. The body counts were verified by the Polish underground.
And it says what? What does it say in those documents?
30,000 Jews,
Jews. It says the word
killed
Jews.
Minsk week of in
In
the city of
1941.
Minsk. Yeah. We had actually even had some aerial overflights that were taken of the early killing centers in Minsk and Baranovich, where they were just doing mass murders with shooting on pits. We had photographs of them.
So Roosevelt made a policy decision.
Well, rather than risk a fight with the British, the Jews were just expendable to the war effort. And so as the inmates of Auschwitz watched in horror, Allied planes flew overhead and dropped their bombs on routine and targets further north. We could have bombed the killing centers.
It's terrible.
You know, I learned 3 things in the vault. So 3 great evils in the century were communism, fascism, and indifference. And indifference is the deadliest of the 3. There weren't very many Jews, and no one really much cared about them.
But would you say that Roosevelt was anti-Semitic, or this was his policy?
No, he was trying to do a difficult job. The British were adamantly opposed to a rescue plan for the Jews.
Why?
Because if the Jews went to Palestine, it would disrupt the Arabs, disrupt the oil issue.
All
It
oil.
would give Hitler a propaganda weapon. You know?
We're going to cut for a commercial break. This is, I say it all the time, it's very heavy, and the truth is that the British, after there was a Holocaust, put Jews in concentration camps or DP camps in Cyprus. They didn't let them get into Palestine. They didn't let them even come near their homeland. I mean,
They did worse than that. They armed the Arabs to destroy the Jewish state. They thought they could sweep you into the sea.
Tragic story. History is unbelievable. We'll be back after commercial break to continue with John Loftus and the secret war against the Jews.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high to have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the backdoor channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at Audible.com or on iTunes. Discover the mystery of the Kaddish. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or Audible.com.
If you don't buy this book after the last segment, I don't know what you're going to read. I mean, this is unbelievable. And by the way, John told me that he did not write this book for Jews. He wrote it for Christians to understand the history of what happened for the last 50 years to the Jewish people, to Armenians, and to Gypsies, and to many other people who were devastated and